Hey, feeling good, like I should. When in dark, I walk around the neighborhood, feeling blessed.
Alrighty, so this activity is a performance task, and it involves triangles, and specifically the understanding and use of Pythagorean theorem to complete the task. So this is a great task for us to do at the end of Chapter 9 as we prepare for our Chapter 9 Test 2, which is going to be primarily focusing on Pythagorean theorem. In order to do this task, you should print off the 10th task worksheet that is on the Google Classroom, and you will want to have graph paper, a ruler, or you don't necessarily need the ruler for measuring, but actually you might need it for measuring as well as using it for straight edge, and a pencil, scissors, and tape. And what we are going to do is we, or you, are going to create a tent. But there are certain restrictions for this tent. And it's not going to be real size. It's going to be a scaled down model of a tent that you could use in real life if you were to actually take these measurements and apply them to canvas and buy all the materials that you needed. So let's just run down what our task is here. Your task is to design a tent like the one in the picture that we saw above. So it's going to be one of those old-fashioned types of tents, not anything that's new and fancy that you get at REI. Okay. Your design must satisfy these conditions. It must be big enough for 2 adults to sleep in with their baggage. It must be big enough for someone to move around in while kneeling down. The bottom of the tent will be made from a thick rectangle of plastic. So you are not going to actually be creating that piece of plastic. You're only going to create the canvas tent, but you'll need to know the dimensions of that rectangle plastic because that's going to be an important dimension for the tent, for the bottom of the tent. The sloping sides of the 2 ends will be made from a single sheet of canvas, and it should be possible to cut up the canvas so that the 2 ends do not need sewing together along the sloping sides. It should be possible to zip up the ends at night. Okay, so that's a way of saying that this piece of canvas that you see making up the tent, here's a tent flap here, here's a tent flap here, here's a rectangular side, the other side is the rectangular side, and then you've got matching tent flaps that are triangles on the back, as you see here. And this should all be cut from one piece of canvas. We do not want to cut out this rectangle here, or this rectangle here, this triangle here, and then eventually sew them up. Okay, so one piece of canvas with all the necessary measurements completely marked so that when you set up your tent, you should be able to put in the poles, secure those poles, secure these corners, and then zip front and back and have the tent completely secure. So the 2 vertical tent poles will hold up the tent, okay? But there's only going to be 2. We're not going to have 1 in the middle. We're not going to make 3, okay? So let me just go ahead and kind of show you what I've created over the years. Remember, the description of our design. It must be big enough for 2 people to sleep in. Okay, so you want to have it wide enough for 2 people to sleep in. So you think of it kind of like looking like this. This would be the rectangular plastic on the bottom where you're sleeping, and you want to have space in there so 2 normal-sized adults would be able to sleep comfortably. Notice that they're not telling you what the dimensions should be. You're going to come up with those dimensions. Now, I came up with, if you had it 7 feet long, that could accommodate a person who was more than 6 feet tall. And if it was 6 feet wide, that should be able to be enough of a width for 2 people to sleep side by side. I'm thinking of a queen-size bed may not even be 6 feet across. It might be more like 5 feet across. So that should be plenty, okay? Does that mean you need to create yours with the base of your tent where they're going to be sleeping 7 by 6? No, you could do 6 by 6. You could do 7 by 5. You can maybe even get away with 6 by 5. It's entirely up to you, but you just think of a size that must work. I mean, you don't want it to be a 3x4. There's no way anyone's going to sleep in a tent that is 3 feet this direction and 4 feet that direction. Okay? And this is where the graph paper comes in handy, is you can do this and scale it down to where every one of these squares is a square foot. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 units for those dimensions. Okay? And what was the second requirement? It must be big enough for someone to move around while kneeling down. So you picture, how tall do you have to be, or how tall does the tent have to be for someone to comfortably be kneeling and not have to bend over still, okay? We don't necessarily need them to be able to stand up in the tent, but if you made it big enough that they could stand up in the tent, there's no rule against that. So once again, if we come over into here, you think, all right, what if I decided to go with this? There's the 7 feet by 6 feet, and notice how I broke that up into 3 feet increments, because this happened to be 3 feet and that feet would be 3 feet. And then if you had the tent pole be like 5 feet tall, is that tall enough to kneel in comfortably? I think so. Could 4 feet tall be good enough? Maybe, but I think you're pushing it as far as kneeling goes. But it might work. But I would think 5 to 6 feet probably would be better. But you decide on what you would like. I designed mine for 5 feet. Okay, so I don't want to get into too much detail on this now. This is a 2-day activity, and I really want you to think about how you want your dimensions to go. And I want you to make an attempt, and it's okay to make mistakes on your first design. I'm not sure that a student has ever, on the very first design, come up with the perfect tent. There's going to be a bit of trial and error here. But just understand, use the graph paper to get everything proportional in nature. Okay, so this is sort of a perspective drawing of it. This is not 7 units in this direction, but because of the depth, it's kind of hard to see. That would be 7 feet. You're not going to measure that, but that's kind of how it would look like if you were looking at it from this perspective. And of course, this is 3 feet because that's the perspective we're seeing it from the front, and this is 5 feet. Now, one other thing to consider. This is where Pythagorean theorem comes into play. How long does this side of the tent need to be? If it's 6 feet across here and 5 feet here, that means that this is a right triangle that is 3 feet by 5 feet. Those are the 2 legs. So you've got to figure out the hypotenuse, how long that is going to be. And then eventually, when you cut this out and create a scale model, you're going to want to make sure that you get your design to be accurate here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and show you kind of the idea here, where we've got to make sure that these tent flaps are going to come down and form a right angle here, correct? The tent flaps, this is the hypotenuse, the right angles are down here. So you've got to make sure that you design this in such a way where when you fold up the tent and you tape together these flaps and the flaps on the other side, that it looks like a, I guess that's a triangular prism, isn't it? We'll get more into that in chapter 10, but it fits together perfectly. And if you make mistakes with the measurements, it's not going to fit together perfectly, and you can't just fold it over and have parts of it overlap. That is cheating. This has to form a perfectly straight line that is ending up being the same dimensions that we showed right here. Okay, so the 6 feet across, of course, scaled down for your model, but still, that's the basic idea. Okay, so once you have the design, it needs to be one single cut, and so you would just go ahead and cut all the way around it, and then fold everything together and tape them together, and it should form that perfect model. So if you're taping together multiple pieces, you're not following the directions correctly. Okay, so let's look at the very bottom. These are the directions. These were the parameters. Okay, so what are the directions? It says first, estimate the relevant dimensions of the typical adult and write these down. Okay, You can have flexibility with that. Please don't just copy the ones that I did. You decide on what you want to do, and then you'll also estimate the dimensions for the rectangular base, like I showed you. Okay. Then after you've done that, then estimate the length of the vertical tent poles, and you'll need to explain these measurements. Well, explaining the measurements, it's like how tall is a typical person when they're kneeling. You need to have it at least that, just a little bit higher. Then these are the hard parts. Draw and sketch to show how you will cut the canvas from a single piece. Show all the measurements clearly, and then calculate any lengths or angles you don't. Now, honestly, probably not going to be angles that you're going to be worrying about there, but it would be calculating any lengths, which ones that you don't know would be the hypotenuse of the right triangle, which is going to be these lengths right here. Okay, so you'll want to show your work, show the Pythagorean theorem and how you got those measurements, and then your final product will be a three-dimensional model of your tent placed on top of a piece of paper that has your name and has you answering these questions and basically writing down the dimensions for your tent and the work that you show for your Pythagorean theorem. Okay, so I expect this to take a little while, and I expect you to have some questions. It's totally okay. I'm going to create another video where I'm actually going to show you how I would cut everything out and how I would fold the tent and how the final product would look. Okay, but I'm not going to do that yet. I want you to struggle a little bit with this and see if you can get it perfect without me modeling the final product for you. But today, I guess I'm assigning it in 2021. I'm assigning this on a Monday. So tomorrow, which will be Tuesday, I will be presenting another video where I actually show you a finished product. Okay? Okay. So good luck to that. Do your best. And I'm excited to see what you got for your final product. Take care. Bye.
Hey, feeling good, like I should.